Hi, my name's Luke, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation. I'm going to talk about innovation in a couple of different contexts. The first, a little bit about the things that stop us from innovating, both at an individual level but also at an organisational level. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we try and deal with that at SquareWeave and Ourse and a few of the other projects that I'm involved with. So first, a little bit about me. I'm an entrepreneur. I've started a few companies. First of all is SquareWeave, which is a web development company based in Fitzroy. The second one is Ourse, which is an e-democracy platform, which is about connecting citizens to decision makers. And the third one is Grace, which is a cafe based in Fitzroy. And so I'm really going to be talking about innovation in the context of these kinds of organisations. So first, I think there are some things that stop us from innovating at a really personal level. And some of those are things like just general attitudes to it, and sometimes it can be really hard to innovate, and especially attitudes to failure can be really big barriers to innovating in different areas. There's a bit of a prevailing attitude that failure is a real problem and should be avoided at all costs, when I think actually a better attitude is around an opportunity to learn, and that maybe it's an opportunity for us to not just learn individually, but actually learn across an organisation. And so at SquareWeave, when we have failure, we really like to embrace that and try and teach everyone within the organisation what were the things that made that failure happen so that no one makes that mistake again. In fact, in Finland, there's a group of people who've just started the International Day of Failure in October, and in an attempt to really celebrate failure and some of the great things that it can bring to an organisation. You also get this 10% kind of innovation gap, which is the idea that if the innovation isn't good enough or going to be successful enough, then maybe it's not worth doing. And I think this happens much more in larger organisations than smaller ones, because in smaller ones you kind of have to do anything to get ahead. You really have to take any little bit of improvement that you can get. Whereas in larger organisations you often come across, well, it's not going to be good enough, soon enough, big enough, and so we won't do that because there are other better projects to work on. And I think also there's a bit of a reticence to just try things. Just try it out and see what happens. See what the result is. Don't plan too much. Explore it a little bit first. And sometimes people want to plan out whole projects before they even commence them, when really they just need to get started. And after you have a go of it for a little while, then you can realise what the value is there. And so at an individual level, some of these attitudinal stuff is some of the biggest barriers to really trying out new innovative ways of doing things. At a corporate level, I think it works a little bit differently, because you've actually got a whole lot of other things in play. So for example, you've got things like organisational structure, you've got bureaucracy, you've got policy, you've got process. All these kinds of things make the beast more complicated. And a lot of the time they facilitate really great work, but sometimes they can get in the way. And the places they get in the way are often the edge cases, the bits at the border, and that's often where innovation lies. Innovation lies at the interface between systems that don't normally come together, or the edge conditions around projects that aren't really clear. And generally process and bureaucracy aims to exclude those things, or at least channel them into areas. And so to combat that in a larger sense, you really need to be quite deliberate. So LinkedIn started a project a little while ago called the Money Team. And the Money Team was about figuring out how LinkedIn could make more money. And so we're quite singular in purpose. And so because they were able to be so singular in this purpose, they were also empowered with a whole lot of freedom. And so they were their own team, they had their own little space, they did their own thing, and they had this single goal, which meant they didn't have to worry as much about the bureaucracy and the process and the policy. They were just single-mindedly heading towards this goal. So you can do it even within the constraints of a large organisation. And often I think the bureaucracy and the channeling of work and breaking up into teams can really prevent innovation at interfaces. There's a great story about a university that was trying to foster more innovation and more connectedness between different departments. And so got together a whole lot of engineers and a whole lot of veterinary professors and lecturers, and said to both groups, bring a problem. Bring a problem that you're working on at the moment. Bring a problem that you've been working on for a while. Bring one that you haven't been able to crack. Bring one that maybe has lots of different parts. Bring one that you think maybe you just need fresh eyes on. And so the vets stood up and went, cool, so we've got this problem about horses' knees. And, these horses, they take part in this particular kind of race, and and there's a really high likelihood that they get broken knees, and that's obviously not really good because for racing horses we then have to put them down. And so we've been trying to design these braces for their knees, and we just can't crack it. We've looked at the muscular system, we've looked at the cardio system, we've looked at all these different ways of breaking it up, and we just can't crack it. And the engineers looked at the big diagram of the horse's knee and went, well, your moments are wrong. And so the engineers brought this completely different way of looking at this problem that then allowed the vets to go off and with all their knowledge about animal anatomy to go and design a good solution because they could look at the problem through a different lens. And sometimes innovation is really about looking at older problems or tough problems through different lenses. In corporate environments also, you often have the problem of only ever measuring projects or potential projects against the successes of the past. And so only if it's as good or better than previous successes is it worth doing. And sometimes that means that you won't do a couple of 2% improvement projects because they're not as good as the 10% improvement project that we just did. And of course, if you do 10 2% improvement projects, well then that would still actually be worth it. And so how you evaluate whether to proceed with projects sometimes needs to be challenged. And of course, in any organizations, there's always the fear of failure stuff that comes up again. And especially where success or failure is maybe tied to KPIs or tied to performance reviews or tied to all kinds of things, that can make it really hard for an individual to go out and go, I'm going to try this thing. Because I think overall, if I try 10 things, that a couple of them are going to be pretty valuable and one or two of them are going to be really valuable. And they need to be able to bear the loss of the couple that don't work out very well at all. And so how do we start to combat some of this individual impediment and corporate impediment to innovation? I think there's a couple of techniques you can use. So the first is one that we used with great success at Oursay. So at Oursay we're trying to solve this problem where we want to get people reconnected with decision makers. So how do you do that? That's a really hard problem. How do you get to a situation where citizens really care about what their politicians are doing and really can communicate with them? How do you get to a situation where politicians want to listen and want to partake in that conversation? So what we did is we went around to a whole lot of people and asked them to help us both destroy and rebuild this idea. So we say to them, here's the idea, we're going to have people, they're going to go on a website, it's going to be a match-up, and then the two leaders are going to be in a debate, and it'll be great. We said, what do you think? And what are the problems, importantly? So tell us about the problems, and then help us to find and design solutions that deal with that problem. And so we did this again and again and again, until we got to a point where we had a system that was really robust to a lot of the problems, really powerful to help facilitate that communication. And importantly, we had a whole lot of people involved, because all these people had helped build this thing. I think another one is being really particular about the people you involve at different stages of a project. Often projects get evaluated much too early before they've had a chance to really realize their potential. And so sometimes you need to only really talk to the people who say yes, and only really talk to the people who are going to help you create things before you start tearing it down. It's important to still involve the people who will help you evaluate and figure out whether it's going to be a worthwhile project or not, but just figuring out the right time to be doing those kinds of things can be really powerful. And so at an organizational level, organizations need to start thinking about how they're going to empower individuals to have that kind of individual agency. So give them the power to take a project and creatively destroy it. Give them the power to be really selective about who they talk to about at different stages of the project. How do you empower employees to have that sense of agency? And Google famously have been really good at this with 20% time. So take a day of your week and go and do something that you think is going to be a valuable project. So that's kind of the individual agency approach to how you might combat that innovation piece, the impediments. At a really practical level, there are a few other techniques that you can look at. So the first is one that we use to great success at SquareWeave called minimum viable product. Your minimum viable product is basically an attempt to test the idea that you have. So what's the minimum, the smallest thing, to test the viability of the product, that actually tests the viability of the product? And so an example might be that you want to sell night vision cameras. And so instead of going through R&D and spending a couple of $1 million developing night vision cameras, maybe you go down to Brunswick Street with a set of night vision goggles and take it around to a whole lot of bars and ask people if they'd actually use it and get them to try it out. And if you go down there and nobody uses it, then maybe it's not a good product to be pursuing. But if a whole lot of people are really excited, then maybe you can go to the next step. Maybe you can get a cheap lens to put on the front of a regular camera and see if people use that. Maybe you can incrementally test this idea until you get a product that people are happy with. And sometimes the people you talk to will have great suggestions about other ways that you could develop the product or other ways that you could take the platform. And so this is part of a broader suite of tools which is around the lean methodology. And core to this is the build, measure, learn cycle. So you build a thing, hopefully a small thing, you measure the results of that thing, and then you learn off the back of it, and then you build again. And so you go around in this cycle, building, measuring, and learning until you've got something that's really powerful. The other one that's really powerful is brand co-creation. And in brand co-creation, this is really about building a brand or an idea or a product with someone. And so sitting down, spending 15 minutes talking to them about the thing that you want to build, and then figuring out how they react to it. So how do they react really overtly? How do they react really subtly? And what can you learn from that? And how can they help you to find the thing that you want to make? And especially if a brand is what other people tell each other about the thing that you're trying to make, the story is really important there, and how people talk about it is really important. So how do you involve other people to help you co-create that idea? And so really the practical stuff is about both minimizing risk and thinking big, but not letting big thinking get in the way of doing stuff. And so still doing things that allow you to start small, but then will build up to something bigger. So I think innovation, really, there are quite a few impediments, both at a personal level as well as an organizational level. And they really need to be treated in different ways. At a personal level, it's about having the tools to go and combat that kind of thing or find new ways to be innovative. And at an organizational level, it's about making the space for people to experiment and do new things and try new things. I think there's a big piece about encouraging individual agency, and that's both individuals being comfortable about having individual agencies as well as organizations fostering that within their employees or team members or project teams or whatever it is. And then finally, it's about thinking about how you can do more with less and doing it smarter instead of more. Thanks a lot for your time.